Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, I'm joined with my co-host, Allie Seibert. Allie is host of Allie in the Archives, which you can now get on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere that you listen to your podcast. She is also the author of The Mysterious Miss White. This is a book that we have not covered yet, and so we decided to do a whole show on it. Allie, welcome to the show. And
Thank
where can
you.
we get this book?
You can get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Um, and if you want it local, ask your local library, and I'm sure they will grab you a copy.
Well, let's dive right in. You know this case best, so what do we need to know about it?
All right, so today we are talking about the case of Ella Marple. This is a case that is one of those things where it's the truth is stranger than fiction. It's a story that I don't think even the most twisted mind could have come up with because it is just that bizarre. It's a story that was buried for years and years and decades and decades. A friend of mine actually stumbled upon it. She actually does a podcast out in Lansing, which in Michigan, and she contacted me a couple years ago because she was researching this family, the Marple family, and she had come across some weirdness in their genealogy and kind of some weird background stuff. And she wasn't super sure because she wasn't able to find a ton of information, but she was like, "This is odd." And they have connections to Fenton, which is where I live. So she contacted me and she's like, "Hey, can you pull some info on these people, see if the museum has anything, and let me know?" And I was like, "Yeah, easy peasy. Like, sure, of course." And I thought it was going to be like a really quick thing because the Fenton Museum has a ton of stuff. So I went down there and I was like looking through like surname stuff and looking for Marples, looking for Blanchards. That was another name she mentioned. And nothing was coming up. And I was like, this is so odd. And so I went home and, our local newspaper does a really, really good job of documenting historical things that have happened in town. And I was 100% sure that if I just did a quick Google search of these people, some article would have been written in the last 40 years about the crazy thing that happened in 1908. And so I did, and nothing came up. And I thought this is really odd. And I was just about to text her and say, like, listen, really sorry, but I have no idea what the heck's going on. I can't find anything about these people. I think you made them up. And then I did a quick search in the newspaper archives website that I use. I use Genealogy Bank. I love it. And all of these articles started coming up about poisonings, about disappearances, about burying people under fake names. And I was like, oh my God, this is a gold mine. And I became so obsessed with this case. It was all I thought about. It was all I talked about. Everyone hated me for like 6 months because it was so annoying. But it was so fascinating. And so I spent months just going through reading the articles chronologically to find out what the heck was going on and putting pieces together, connecting death certificates, connecting ancestry stuff, connecting all of this other, like all of these puzzle pieces to figure this out. And I thought like I need to make sense of it. So I wrote it down, not intending for it to be a book in any way, shape, or form. It was more just like I need to put my thoughts somewhere so I don't go nuts. So I did. And it became The Mysterious Mrs. White, which is the case we are going to discuss today. And I'm so, so excited to share it because I love sharing this case with people. Again, this is one nobody knew about. The Historical Society had no idea. People locally had no idea, which makes it all the more exciting to get to share. So, our story today starts in New York. Um, the Marple family lived in Gloversville. And in Gloversville, there was George Marple, who is the patriarch. He is the father. There is sorry, I've got all my notes here. Um, there is Elizabeth, who is George's daughter, their mother, obviously, um, who is I don't have her name written down, which is really unfortunate. Um, sorry, one second. I want to make sure that I have her name right. I don't know. I'll come back to it.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about this for a second. So you kind of found the story through a friend, and you're doing this research, and then you hit the gold mine. When you're doing, because you've written other books before,
Mhm.
was this one of the ones that just really captivated you right from the get go, or was it the frustration of not being able to find something?
This was so funny enough, this is the first book like, I'd done, like, house history books, but I'd never done one for me. Um, so it was more just, like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about the mystery of it all. It's an unsolved case. I couldn't stop thinking about what actually happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the people involved, where they were, what was going on with them. Um, and it was like I said, it was just too good.
Yeah, you know what? Just looking at the information that you've given me, and I know this is a fraction of it. For those that are listening, she's got multiple articles that she's pulled. She's found death certificates and pictures that we're going to be putting on the YouTube show. And I think that's really amazing that these are from the 1800s. We've even got
Yeah,
a rendered, kind of looks like an AI image, but not to spoil things. But this type of information is really hard to come by. So I find it very impressive when people are able to do that, which
thank
is
you.
another impressive thing about your show, Alley in the Archives.
Thanks for saying that. I love doing it. I think it's so fun. Um, so yeah, all right. So we're in New York. We're in Gloversville. It's the 1850s. Um, Ella and her sister Elizabeth are living with their mother and father in Gloversville. Mom and dad are very wealthy. Dad's a very well-to-do farmer in the area. It's known throughout Gloversville that he has money. Um, but weirdly enough, and this is we're starting off strong with some weirdness in their early lives. Ella and Elizabeth don't attend school. There's no evidence that they ever attended school for more than a couple months at a time. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, it's 1800s. Girls didn't go to school. They did, especially in towns where, education was appreciated. In Gloversville, that was the case. And when if your family is down on their luck, needs help with the farm, needs more hands, then sure, they wouldn't go to school. But that wasn't the case here. They had money. So it's weird that they weren't attending school. By all accounts, the family was very isolated. It was just the 4 of them almost always. Um, they ran the farm, they stayed home, that was it. Uh, flash forward about 20 years, Maggie, not Elizabeth is the mom. Holy moly, if I could get my head screwed on straight, that would be so helpful for the world. Ella and Maggie are the daughters. Elizabeth and George are the parents. Everyone, I'm sorry. I promise I'm actually, like, a professional at this and I know what I'm doing.
It's
It's
okay.
sometimes
These things happen.
sometimes, I gotta keep everybody else on their toes. If I was smart all of the time, I would it
Yeah.
would be too much. Okay, so Ella and Maggie, they're living at home, they're not going to school, it's weird, alright? Fast forward 20 years, in 1883, Maggie gets married, she just has a kid, her and her husband are living nearby, everything's fine, she's young, she's healthy, and then she drops dead in the middle of the kitchen during a conversation with her husband. By all accounts, there was nothing wrong with her. There was no issue with the childbirth. There was nothing going on. She dropped dead. It
About
was
how
some
old is
sort of like
she?
a 20s.
Okay, so she's young. She shouldn't be dropping
Mhm.
dead.
No, no. It was odd. It was never fully investigated. It was just one of those things. So Maggie's dead. Now it's just Ella, George, and mom, Elizabeth. Mom, father, and daughter. And they're still living in Gloversville. Now, at this point, let's see, 56, 66, 76, 86. Ella is 27. And she is still living at home. She's not married. She's not seeing anybody. Again, this goes a little against the norms of the time. It would
Okay.
have been assumed that she would be, married, getting out of the house, having a family of her own. But for whatever reason, she wasn't. She was still living upstairs at parents' house. And now this is where one of the most important characters in our story appears. His name is James Blanchard. James Blanchard is the neighbor. He lives a couple fields over. He's a little older than Ella, but not much. And he's married with 8 children. Now, James starts hanging around more often, okay? And, Ella isn't seeing anybody. She's isolated. But all of a sudden, she starts getting attention from James. And from everything that I've read, James was a schmoozer. Um, he could talk to anybody, get his way. I've never seen a picture of him, so if anyone's listening and has heard of this case and happens to have a picture of James Blanchard, please send it my way. I would kill for that. But from everything I've read, he was very attractive, he was tall, he was strong, he could get what he wanted, and he often did. So anyway, he's paying all of this attention to Ella, who is soaking it up. She's loving it. Never mind the fact that he is married and has 8 children. Eventually, these two lovebirds decide we need to be together. And in order to do that, we have to run away. So in 1885, the two of them decide to leave. But they don't just hop on a train and get out. Instead, what Ella chooses to do is climb out the upstairs window of her parents' house with a bag of her clothing, as well as several $100s of her father's money. So
Oh,
she's stealing from dad. She's running away from like out the window, which is odd to begin with. And I think kind of speaks to maybe the control that was happening there. And her and James hop on a train and they come to Michigan. While they're there, they get married. Now, I'm sure I know what you're thinking, but wait, Allie, how can James get married? Because he's already married.
with
You're
8
right.
kids. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So they can't do that. They had to fake some of the details and everything, and they did, and it's in the certificate and everything. But so they do that. George, meanwhile, in New York, is telling everybody that his daughter ran away. The police are out looking for them. And a few months later, they're caught. They find them in Michigan and they bring them back. And they end up in jail because at the time, and I think now still, bigamy is, not super accepted. Can't really,
That's pretty impressive that they actually tracked them down. Because
it is, isn't it?
I mean, the technology today, I don't know, what were they looking at, train tickets and
To be honest, I don't know how they did it. I imagine there was communication between New York and Michigan, uh, police, but
right.
it would have been tough
Yeah, no, I that's very impressive that they actually did that.
because it's not like they could just, like, ping their cell phones.
Right. And the whole
And people
marriage thing, I mean, if you're writing things down on paper and there's no type of shared database that you can access, you really wouldn't know if
Mhm.
someone's married or not, right?
That's right. It's so true, yeah.
Or what their real name is.
Eg exactly. So they're caught, they're brought back to New York, they're thrown in jail. George is pissed. He won't bail Ella out. He says she's gotta spend her time in there, she deserves it. She, got what she deserved. So Ella spends a couple weeks in jail, a couple days in jail. So does James, they're separated. They get out and, immediately, almost immediately, do the same exact thing. Get together, grab some money, grab some clothes, and they head back to Michigan. They don't tell anybody.
So
Um,
he's still married.
oh yeah. Uh, but good point. At this point, his wife decides that twice is enough, and she files for divorce, and it's granted, and she has custody of all the kids. So James, for better or worse, is free.
Well, that sounds like a fast process. It's not like North Carolina where you have to wait a year and a day.
Yeah, which is interesting. I didn't know that was the current thing.
Yeah.
It's a long time to wait.
Yeah, that's the Bible Belt for you.
That's crazy. I don't know what it is in Michigan. I'd be curious to find out.
I can testify
Um,
that that year will last a really long time too.
I bet. I bet.
But yeah.
It doesn't sound ideal to me in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, so
Um,
James, he leaves and he's now
he's
single.
now single, ready to mingle with Ella, and they're hanging out in Michigan. So they're there again. They come over, they end up in Flint, they end up in Fenton. So they kind of explore the area. But after a couple months, or a couple years, Ella gets a letter in the mail from her father letting her know that her mother has died. It's 1891. So they've been together a while, living as husband and wife, which wasn't actually the case, but that's how they're living. Ella is, involved with her family enough still, somehow, that she decides to go home, presumably for the funeral. Um, so her and James hop on a train and head back to Gloversville. Now it's just George, her father, living there in this big house on this big farm alone. Ella decides, I can't leave him here alone. We're going to move in. So we've got George, the father, who obviously has some major tension with his daughter, seeing as she
Right.
stole some of his money, snuck out, left, was put in jail, and he wouldn't bail her out. There's some history there. Then we've got James, who was the one who took the daughter, was married, lived across the way from them for so long, and now has decided to involve himself like this. And they're all living under one roof. Okay. So you can imagine that tensions are high.
And this is in New York, or are they doing this
This
in
is in New
Michigan?
York.
Okay.
Yeah, this is in New York. So they're still on George's big farm property in New York.
Okay.
Now, to ease some of the burden, because it's a big house and it's a big farm, and George is older, they hire a housekeeper. They hire a young girl, she's 13, named Layla Kosselman, and she moves in and is their live-in housekeeper. At the time, hiring a young person like that, she's a kid, hiring a child like that wasn't entirely unusual. They would, you know, parents would have their kids go off and work to earn money for the family. It was one less mouth for the family to have to feed. Um, and also it was seen sometimes like a way to get your foot in the door to get some experience working. But she's 13, so she's a child. But she moves in. So now it's the four of them. And like I said, tensions are high. They are so high that at one point, um, James is arrested and sent to the county jail for being a quote disorderly person. That was a complaint submitted by George. We don't know what preceded that. Another time, the neighbors claimed that James was walking around town saying that he was looking for a way to get rid of George, which is, a choice thing to say about your fake father-in-law. Another night, there was a gunshot that went off. George was so scared he ran into the cornfield. People thought he was dead. They were searching for him for like 24 hours before he finally turned up. Just some weird stuff, you know?
Right.
Um,
So
yeah,
these are kind of
just
clues that
bizarre.
someone may, you know, want to kill you if you start hearing these rumors and
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you're living
It
in a
it
house
wouldn't
together, right?
exactly,
And
like, I
George
wouldn't be.
also has some money, right?
Yes, that's a really good point.
So another
George
good
is really well
reason
off.
to whack him. Does he have
Mhm.
any other kids that may have, or is it just his
George?
one daughter?
It's just his one daughter.
So
So
everything
it
goes to her.
Mhm.
Oh,
Mhm.
the
Isn't
choice is
that
starting to get
convenient?
more simple, yeah.
Yes, indeed. So they're here in New York, but like you said, um, I think James realizes and Ella realizes that dad has money. They want to use the money. They can't use it where they are. So they decide to invite George out on a little excursion. They tell him, hey, let's go on a vacation to Michigan. And they set it up like it's just a getaway. Like it's just going to be a couple weeks. We'll take a train out. We'll show you where we were living. It's so nice there. We love it. It'll be great. And George is like, "Okay, sure." And they even take Layla, the 13-year-old. They're like, "This is going to be like a whole thing. It's going to be so nice." Unbeknownst to George, Ella and James had already sold off all of his property. Every acre of it was gone. Um, they had sold the last little parcel of it, I think right before they left. They'd sold off all of his belongings. They'd sold the house. They weren't coming back to New York. This was a one-way trip. So they get to Michigan, and that's when they finally tell George, "We're not going back to New York. This is where we're living."
Surprise, yeah.
Yeah, how nice is that, right? They arrive in Flint. They come down to Fenton, which is just south of Flint. And it's a little bustling town, it's growing pretty quickly. It's 1894 at this point. Um, and they purchase a house on William Street. Um, yeah, there it
Is that the
is.
house?
That's it. The house is still standing today. Um, it's brick now, which is really cool, but it's still right there. Um, the house is purchased under James's name. He's listed as the owner, but I think it's pretty fair to assume that it was purchased with George's money, and I doubt that George knew it was under James's name. Just a feeling. Um, but that means that James gets to buy this house without spending a cent of his own money, and it's in his name, so it's his. Great. Perfect. Easy peasy.
And I assume
Um,
that was a common thing during that time was that the man would be the person on the deed. But
yeah,
what's
for sure.
interesting is when they went to sell it or when they sold George's property, did
Mhm.
they forge his name to sell that?
They
Because
would have had
wouldn't that
to.
look suspicious if Ella was the person selling it?
I don't have an answer for you, but that's, yeah, that's I would think so. I think anybody in their right mind would be like, "There's something weird happening here."
Right, like, he's still alive.
Right.
And a lot of times you sign those documents in person,
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
didn't have
Yeah,
a, DocuSign.
exactly. Yeah. I would I'm, guessing here, but I'm putting a lot of pieces together in order to do that. My best bet would be that she told people or James told people that George was really sick or really ill or really old and couldn't come out and
Right,
do this, so they're doing it for him. They're doing a good deed, you know?
right. Or even that he died,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. I think it's interesting to consider, was Ella doing this by her own volition? Was she being kind of coerced into doing this by James? Who's leading and who's following here, you know?
And that's a really good question because if you look at her, she's already taken money from her dad once
Mhm.
without any type of authorization. And
Yeah.
so, maybe she is being manipulated. I don't know if that money ever got if she possessed that money, during that time,
Yeah.
or was it, here's $1,000 that I took from my dad and she's giving it
Mhm.
right to James.
Yeah. Hard to say.
But yeah, those are really good questions.
Yeah. And that's kind of the crux of all of this is like, is Ella, this scheming sort of person who's going this hard against her dad, or is James so convincing and so charismatic that he's able to convince her to do this and go along with it? I think that's the basis of this whole case. Um, so keep that in mind, I guess, as we're going here. So anyway, they purchased this house. It's 1894. They've got this nice house on Williams Street. It's at the very end of the street. It's just on the outskirts of town. It's still like in town, but you're like, on the side. There's this really great map of Fenton from the 1880s, and you can see the houses there. It wasn't built for them, it's an older house. And the house is on the very, very edge of the map. There's this big windmill out there. It's like got like kind of a farm thing going on, but it's cool to see. So you can see that they're as far out from town as they can be. Whether that's by chance or by choice, I don't know. But nonetheless, there are whispers throughout town almost as soon as they move in that there is tension among the family, that the family is kind of weird, that there's, you know, whether it's violence or just like emotional manipulation going on, something isn't right at the house on William Street. There are also whispers about arsenic. People had seen it on the porch in the hallway when they came to visit, just like little bottles. It wasn't entirely unusual to have things like arsenic at that point in time. They used it for like mouse poison,
Right.
but it was enough that people mentioned it. And I think that's the key there. So, this strange family is living in Fenton. George, the dad, James, Ella. and the 13-year-old or so, Layla. Now, there continues to be rumors going around that James really hates George. He's telling people he wants to get rid of him still. He's telling them that they don't get along, all of this stuff about George. Interestingly enough, George dies on October 14th, 1898. He is 77 years old. He dies in the house, in the upstairs bedroom, in his bedroom. Now, one thing that's interesting is that James went around town telling people after George died that George died because he was eating too many grapes. That is the quote from multiple sources. Multiple people said that this is what James said. He said George was eating too many grapes, and that's why he died. The actual cause of death listed on the death certificate is several contributing factors. Old age, heart failure, and something called cholera morbus. Now, cholera morbus is a really, really fancy term for gastrointestinal illness. A lot of times it's associated with unsanitary living conditions. It's just, it's like a really, really bad stomach bug.
Hmm.
And yeah, that makes sense. It's 1898. Things aren't pristine. He's an older man. But one thing that's interesting is that the symptoms of cholera morbus can also be the same symptoms as someone would exhibit if they were poisoned with arsenic.
That's really interesting. And for those that are just listening, she actually has the death certificate. And so, again, these are not easy to come by, but due to her expertise, she was able to produce this. I think that
You're
that's
being very kind.
no, really. I mean, my book was from 1973, and that was a struggle to find things. I can't imagine things from the 1800s. I do think that it's very interesting that they have these causes. And the other thing that I kind of keep in mind is, okay, 1800s, how good are they really at determining deaths? Like
Mhm,
old age. Okay, I think that's
mhm.
probably a common box to check. But if you're an older person and you die, and I go to investigate your death in the 1800s, I meant, what test are you really running besides
Yep,
seeing if I've got a knife in my back, right?
exactly.
Or
Exactly.
maybe taking
And
the
I think
word of the people around you, and they're like, "Oh, he was eating all these grapes, and he was having a stomach ache beforehand, and,
Mhm.
he grabbed his" whatever story that they make
Yeah,
up. It's gonna be really
yeah.
hard to disprove that without you're not running a blood test for arsenic. I realize that nowadays we can look at signs and especially on the body with arsenic and other poisons that you can document, but if it's bloating of the intestines, the other thing too is when you die, that's kind of a common thing that happens too is you bloat
Mhm.
up. So just some
Exactly.
interesting points there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and the one thing that I wonder too is, James is known for being well-spoken and funny and
Right.
engaging. And smart. He's smart. And I almost wonder if like if did I say George or James? James is known for that. I almost wonder if George was eating a lot of grapes, but on top of the grapes was, a sprinkle of
Arsenic.
arsenic,
Oh, yeah. And that
which
would make sense.
Yeah, and that's aside from the absolutely horrible circumstances, that's a really funny thing to then be able to go around and say, "Yeah, he was eating too many grapes." You know?
Right. Yeah. And I
So,
I think
I
that
don't
that
know.
is a good point that he had the personality to be able to convince people that this is what happened. And so he's
Mhm.
able to sell that story of, "Oh, yeah, he was eating all these grapes and, he wasn't taking care of himself. I don't know what happened."
Yeah. Yeah, and people believe it. Um, so, at this point, now George is out of the picture. James officially owns the house. There's nothing standing in the way of that. Um, and now we have the question to consider of where is George's money? So he passes. Did he leave it to Ella? Did he leave it to James? In leaving it to Ella, is he essentially leaving it to James? Just interesting questions to think about. All right, so that was 1898. So 4 years later, we're still living here. Ella, James, and Layla. They're still living here in the house on William Street. But then things start getting weirder. In 1902, Ella is summoned back to New York for a lawsuit involving the property that she had sold of her father's. Something with the stuff being wrong, stuff not lining up. Surprise, surprise, right? Are we surprised? No, that's
Right.
shocking, right? So, Ella, according to James and Layla, she goes to New York. But weirdly, she is still gone by October. So months later, she still hasn't returned. The neighbors start getting concerned because they haven't seen Ella in a while. James and Layla, however, do not seem concerned. In fact, Layla seems so unconcerned that she starts to walk around town wearing Ella's clothes. She also refers to herself as Mrs. Blanchard, which is James's last name. And they're essentially posing as husband and wife.
And she's about 18 years old at this point, right?
She is. She's young. And she's
So you've got a
just
young 18-year-old, basically like a college student, like a female college
Mhm.
student living with a guy that's what, like in his like 30s or 40s?
Late 40s. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's late
Yeah.
40s and she's like in her prime.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I
Mhm.
don't see if yeah, this is a mystery what's going on, right?
Exactly. And his quote unquote wife is
Right.
conveniently missing.
And he's just,
MIA.
obviously gotten a lot of money recently. So
Mhm. Yeah, everything's coming
that
up
makes him
James,
more attractive,
isn't it?
right?
Uh-huh. That's right. It's interesting. So the neighbors are worried. James and Layla are not worried. Layla decides to bring over her 12-year-old sister from New York, who's still living with her parents. She sends money because they've got money now. Sends
Right.
money over to New York to her sister Annie to take a train. Come on over, bring your stuff. You can move in with us, which is, a choice. Um, but keep in mind, Ella is still missing. Now, it becomes concerning enough to the town that they talk to police. In Fenton in 1902, there wasn't a super strong police force, as you can imagine. There were officers, there was a police, but they weren't trained like they are today. They weren't, you know, taught how to handle different kinds of cases. There isn't like a strategy for handling, situation XYZ. It's just kind of go in and see what you can do.
Just to give you some comparison, in North Carolina, it wasn't until 1973 until they actually had a governing body, which was, training and standards to actually have uniform standards across the state and a minimum criteria.
You're
So
kidding me.
no, and, you can read all about it in, A Murder on Campus, The Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case, which, that is Virginia Olson, and she was murdered in 1973, and so that is how I found out about that fun fact. Yeah, it's
That's
amazing.
crazy. That's crazy. But yeah, that's such a great point because it took that long. So imagine what it was like in 1902. It's just a bunch of dudes with, you
R
know,
Well, and that's what it was. It was a you were either a friend of the police chief or sheriff, or it was, "I was in the military, and so since I can shoot a gun, I am therefore able to be a police officer," which is
yes.
actually why a lot of police departments, have those, military characteristics to them even today, like how you march, how you wear your uniform, all of that. That all came from being highly recruited from the military, and the people that knew how to train police officers were, like former drill sergeants and whatnot. So that's
Oh,
why I
that's
got
so
yelled at in
interesting.
the academy so much, because we had a former drill sergeant running the academy.
Wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah,
Huh.
that's actually, to even the traditions of, like, challenge coins and things like that which were directly from the military, police adopted. But yeah, in the 1900s, this was, "You're a friend of mine, here's your badge,"
Mhm. Yeah,
and it's learn on the job.
exactly. Exactly. Not saying that they were, like, not there for the right reasons, but it gives a little bit of context as to what these people were able to do in these kinds of situations.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah. So on October 25th in 1902, two officers come to the Blanchard home on William Street. And they are there just to check and see what the heck's going on. They've gotten a lot of complaints about Ella being gone. They just need to make sure she's okay. So these three officers show up. Two of them go to the front door. Another one stays in the yard and waits behind the tree. I don't know what they were expecting. There's not really an explanation for why they chose to do it that way, but they chose to do it that way. So the two go and knock on the door, knock, 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 and James answers with a shotgun, which is again a choice. Um, they say, "Hey, buddy, what you doing? What's going on? We just want to come in and take a look around." James is really combative, really confrontational, does not want them to come in. They eventually are able to seize his weapon. They come inside. There's more weapons inside. There's arsenic bottles everywhere. They're able to kind of like, grab the weapons, clean up a little bit. They're asking questions. And Layla and James are both saying they have no idea where Ella is. They haven't seen her in months. They don't know. They haven't heard from her. Crazy, just weird. She must have just left, sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, they hear this noise upstairs. And they all kind of stop. It sounds like footsteps or someone kind of like moving things around upstairs. And James, Layla, and Annie, the sister, are all downstairs. There's no reason there should be noise upstairs. So they stop and listen. And then there's yelling from the front lawn. Ella had been upstairs, opened the window, climbed out, jumped off the roof into the yard, and that officer that was waiting behind the tree was able to grab her. They retain her, they question her, they say, "Why is everyone saying you're gone? Why are you not out in public? Why are they lying? What is going on? She won't talk. James won't talk. Layla won't talk. Annie is a child. She won't talk. The police say, well, I guess that's all we can do. Here's your wife. And then they leave.
That's really interesting. Do you is your feeling that she was being abused and enslaved up there and maybe slowly poisoned, or is this a what do you make of that? You're the expert here, which is why
you know,
you wrote a book on it.
which is which is why you can get my book at.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. You get it from Amazon and Barnes& and Noble, right? Mysterious Miss White.
you know, I at this point, because there's other stuff coming up and I don't want to spoil it till we get there. But at this point, it seems like there's something odd happening. As far as Ella jumping out the window and running, was she running because she'd been trapped and she knew she could get help if she ran because the police were there? Or is she running so that the police don't find her? I think the consensus at this point in the story among neighbors, whoever at the time, was that Ella didn't want to have to go to New York for this lawsuit. She knew she was in the wrong. She didn't want to have to pay the money. So she just faked her disappearance so that she wouldn't have to go.
Thinking about this from kind of another angle, what about if James may have told her a lie, like, "The police are out to get you. You need to hide out. You can't go to New York,"
Mhm.
knowing that if she does go to New York, then they're gonna find out that this fraud occurred and then probably find out that, "Oh, how did George die?"
Oh, see, this is what I love about this case because every time I tell this story, somebody has a thought that has not occurred to me at all. And that's one of them because I'd never thought of that. That's
Well, just
totally
look at, like,
possible.
his pattern of behavior, right? Like, how is he
Mhm.
treating people? And with him, from what you're telling me, is he's manipulating people along the entire way, right? He
Mhm.
manipulates her, he manipulates his ex-wife, and at some point, he's, manipulating George,
Yeah.
and he also manipulates, the 18-year-old housekeeper slash second wife, which is really strange that she's walking around town
Mhm.
claiming to, use Miss Blanchard.
Yeah.
But if you think about it from the perspective of George tells her, like, "Look, you've got to pretend like you're dead, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna do you a favor and, you know, have this girl wear your clothes and go around and use your name, and then, you know, that way the heat's off you."
Yeah. That's 100% possible. It really is.
Especially if she really is living in an upstairs apartment, like, that's kind of or
Mhm.
not apartment, but bedroom, and
Yeah.
that's a way to kind of get her out of the picture while making sure that if the money is in her name, because that's also a possibility,
Mhm.
that he's
Yeah.
able to siphon off that while she's
Yeah.
still alive.
Yeah. It's absolutely, absolutely possible, which
It
is
reminds me of when people will defraud they'll take advantage of the older person by, like, keeping them alive so they can get the monthly check.
yeah.
Like, the person is just not being taken care of and kept in, like, a dark room in the house, and no one really cares about them. But,
Hmm.
you know, they'll keep them on life support if they have to just to make sure they get that check.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of the almost the same way that he's treating this of, okay, I'm going to keep her upstairs in this apartment. I've got this 18-year-old that's, in her prime, and I'm in my late 40s. And
Mhm.
so, and then to make matters worse or better for him, he's got another 12-year-old like actually cleaning the house. The 18-year-old's loving it. So she's
Yeah,
happy. And they're probably just mooching off George's money, which is in Ella's name.
100%. Yeah. And, at this point, legally, he and Ella aren't actually married, which means if she dies, that money goes where? We don't know, but probably not to him. So it's
And
like
that's
he has
right.
incentive to keep her alive.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
Yeah. So these kinds of disappearances, where Ella is missing, I'm putting quotes around that for those of you who are watching me on the screen. Um, these kinds of disappearances continue on for the next 6 years. Ella disappears for several months, and then she's seen around town again. And then a couple days later, she's gone, and James and Layla are telling people she's left again. And then she's seen around town like a year later. And then she disappears again. And James and Ella or Layla say, yeah, she left. She's in New York. She's in Chicago. We haven't heard from her in years. Just like a million different stories happening. But she was going, quote unquote, missing for 6 years. Um, I have a lot of theories on why this is. I'm going to hold them for a minute because I want to tell the rest of the story, and then I'm going to go back to that.
Okay.
But it's I have a real problem with James. Okay. So, this brings us all the way up to spring of 1908. This is the last time that Ella is ever seen alive. She is out walking home from town. She meets up with a neighbor who's a friend of hers, and she's talking to her. And according to this neighbor, Ella tells her things are really bad. And this is a direct quote from the neighbor who's quoting Ella at the time. She claims, I'd rather be living at the poorhouse than in the situation I am in, which is a major thing to say because at that point in time, living at the poorhouse, or if ever, honestly, is not where you want to be. It's, that it's not super clean. It's really poor conditions. You're not gonna, it's not a great place you'd want to be living. And yet Ella is saying that that's where she'd rather be rather than in this house with James and Layla and Annie. She tells this neighbor, things are really bad. Hey, I've got something really, really important to tell you. Can you come over later and see me and I'll tell you? And the neighbor's like, yeah, like, sure, weird, but like, yeah, of course. So Ella goes home. That is the last time anybody other than James, Annie, and Layla ever see her. The neighbor does come over to visit. She knocks on the door. James answers. She says, is Ella here? I'm here to see her. He goes, no, she's not here. Like, we don't know where she is. She says, well, I just talked to her. Like, she wants me to come visit. He goes, well, no, she's sick. She's sick. You can't come in. She's sick. And finally, the lady leaves because James won't let her in. And that is the last time Ella Marple is seen alive. Now, for the next several months, now that was in the spring, for the next several months, Annie starts talking to neighbors about the weird things she sees in this house. Now let's see, she was how old when she was brought over? She was like 13 when she was brought over in
Okay.
1908. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. She's like 16. I don't know. I don't do the math. That's not my strong suit.
She's a teenager.
She's like 16. Okay.
Okay.
And she's living at the house still. But every chance she gets, she's telling people in town James hits her. James is violent. There is arsenic and poison all throughout the house. She's not allowed to go in the basement. She's not allowed to go in Ella's room. The doors are locked. And at one point, she even looked through the keyhole of Ella's room. And this is according to Annie. And on the floor of Ella's room, she saw bloodstains. And this freaked Annie out so much that she leaves the house. She runs all the way across town to the house of the Osgoods, which are a couple in town. And she tells them these things. She tells people that Layla wasn't really her sister. She didn't really recognize this woman. She doesn't know who she is. At one point, she heard James and Layla talking. She had asked them where Ella was because she knew Ella. Ella was living in the house with her at the same time for a number of years. She hadn't seen Ella in a while. She asked them where Ella was. According to her, Layla said she's where she won't do any harm. So there's all of these things that she's telling people. And again, people are like, what the heck is going on William Street? This is so bizarre. And once again, the police are called. And they start to investigate. So they question people at first. They take the day to question, and they take the next day to kind of like watch James and Layla, and they're kind of like watching them on the porch, and James and Layla know they're being watched, and it's just kind of a weird investigation sort of situation. The next day, they come to the house, and they investigate there at the house. Now they get there, James and Layla, again, they're saying, we don't know where Ella is. We have no idea. Last we heard, she was in Chicago. We don't know. She's crazy. She just leaves. Again, there is arsenic throughout the house. They do investigate the basement. There's nothing weird there. It didn't look like the dirt had been freshly dug or anything. They go up to Ella's room, and they don't see bloodstains. But they do see all of her clothes still there, still hung. They pull out these envelopes, and in the envelopes are all of these newspaper clippings about when she disappeared the first time, and the police had to come in and look, as well as other cases of women disappearing, being murdered, murdering their significant others. All of these clippings that had been like clipped out of newspapers and stuck in these envelopes. And then they go back downstairs and they start interrogating Layla and James. They're talking to them, they're getting nowhere. And out of the corner of their eye, they see this framed photograph on the table. And they pick it up. And they turn it towards James and Layla. They say, who is this? And James and Layla say, oh, that's Ellen White. That's this old woman. You know, it was so crazy. She showed up on the train a couple months ago, and she's this old woman. She was really sick, so you know, we saw her and we took her to our house and we tried to nurse her back to health, but she was so sick, you know, she died. And they were like, that's weird, guys. Why? And they were
Not
like, did
odd
you
at
know this
all.
woman?
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. They were like, did you know this woman? They were like, no, we just did it out of the goodness of their hearts. And so they're like, that's bizarre. This other officer comes through the living room at that time. The officer who's talking to James and Layla turns the photograph to him. He says, who is this? And the other officer says, oh, that's Ella Marple. So now we're back to James and Layla. And the guy's like, guys, what are you talking about? And that is when they decide to break. They say, you're right. We were lying. Ella's dead. And that is when they start sharing all of this information about Ella being sick for months and months and months. She eventually died. They buried her in the cemetery without a funeral. They buried her under Ellen White because, according to them, Ella told them not to use her real name because she didn't want her family inheriting her money. She wanted it to go to them. They put her in a coffin about 2 feet under the ground. Now, keep in mind, they had money. The coffin was falling apart. It was barely wood. She was dressed in like tatters of clothing. They claimed that they had taken care of her for months when she was sick. She finally died. They did this in secret to protect her for her own wishes. The police are like, okay, now this is like actually fishy. So they decide to exhume her body. Thoughts before I
So
go any further?
this is all really interesting. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure that the police are able to figure this out, that, you don't need Scooby Doo on this case to, be able to solve this one.
Right.
But, eh, there's a lot of other factors too when you're talking about exhuming a body. And how long has she been in the ground for?
Months. So
Okay, so
according to
she's
James
pretty
and
much
Layla, it was the spring. Yeah.
right. And
Mhm.
I'm sure that they didn't pay to, like, have her embalmed or anything like that. But
Mm-mm.
even if they did, you stick her in a cheap coffin, and
Mhm.
she's gonna be mush and bone by the time they dig this up. I had an
Right.
old lady that died with her heat on, and she had been
Oh.
missing for 6 months,
Oh.
and I can tell you when we got to her, first of all, that's the worst smell I've ever smelled in my life. It
Mhm.
burned my nostrils to walk into that room,
Oof.
and when we moved her, it was just a big pool of black goo, and maggots were just all over her. Yeah,
Oh my god.
and she just died of natural causes, but I was able to get in contact
Oh.
with the family, and when I called the funeral home, I told them to wear painter's clothes, not to wear, like, their suits because
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
So
Oh
I say
god.
that because she's her body is not taken care of. It's
Yeah.
in a 2-foot grave, and it's been sitting for 6 to 7 months,
Mhm.
and this is in the 1900s. I don't see a lot they can do besides, okay, you've got you can look at a skull or see if a bone was broken,
Yeah.
something really obvious, right?
Yep.
But the organs and the flesh, that stuff is gonna be rotted off. You're gonna be
Yeah.
and when they do dig into that, it's gonna be really foul,
Exactly.
just
And
to set the
and
scene
that's
for
what
you.
they did. So they did exhume the body. They did send it to the state, bacteriologist or whatever it happened to be at the time in Lansing to be examined. Essentially, they were looking for arsenic, because that seemed to be just this very, very common thread throughout all of this. Um, this took quite a long time. During that time, James and Layla were both arrested, on different charges. They did the examination. Like you said, it had been so long. It's 1908. They don't
Right.
have the tools to look for this. They don't know exactly what they're looking for. And the investigation comes back as no signs of poisoning, no signs of foul play. was natural causes. James and Layla didn't do anything. They're innocent. So
Yeah,
they were
natural
released.
causes because it's a skeleton that you're looking at
Mhm.
with the meat
Exactly.
hanging off of it. I mean, it's not,
Exactly.
you know, I
No.
would bet that body was falling apart when they were,
Yeah.
loading it.
Yeah. Yeah, which is, you know, horrifying
That's
to
interesting
think
that
of.
they don't just because, nowadays you've got an unable to determine category that you can click,
Yes.
and it may have just been the trend that they instead divert to, "Oh, it's natural causes,"
Yeah.
when they don't know really what happened, which is
Yeah.
probably the majority of the time with these.
Exactly. Because they just don't know,
Or you
and
just make
it's
it
a
up. Like, "Yep,
yeah.
I did my
Yep.
examination. This is what it is," and no one's gonna tell you no because they don't know either, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. So, anyway, that goes through. They don't find anything. Before they send James and Layla home, um, the I'm looking for this specific quote here. Okay. So the prosecutor pulls James and Layla into his office and he starts talking to them, like, we don't have any evidence that you did anything, so we can't hold you. I recommend that you do get married because you're living together as a married couple, but you're not married. And at that point in time, that wasn't super appreciated. So
Living in
you need to
sin.
do that. Yeah, exactly. Um, Layla said that she would only get married when she wanted to and not 1 minute before. That was her quote. And James quite literally said, I'm going to quote this again because I love a direct quote. All right. He said, "Shoo, me get married? Why, I'm over 60 years old. I think that is too old for anyone to talk of getting married."
Hmm.
Guess how long it took for them to get married?
10 more
Less than
years?
1 year. Ye 1 year later, they were
1
married.
year later. Oh, okay.
1 year later. Uh, James is, 60 something. Layla is in her 20s. They get married in Canada. Um, Weirdly, James lies on the marriage record. He lies about his age. He's 59 at the time, but he puts himself as being 55. They also said that their usual residence on the record is Linden, which is a town really close to Fenton, but they were living in Fenton. Um, so just kind of like some weird inconsistencies there. They're married in 1909 in May. 2 months later, James dies. According to his death certificate, he died of Bright's disease, which is an outdated term to describe nephritis, which is inflammation of the kidneys. Now, here's something interesting. This is all coming from me. It's conjecture, okay?
Okay.
However, nephritis can be caused by a number of factors, but one of those factors is exposure to chemicals. Specifically,
Arsenic?
guess it, arsenic! Ding, 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 ding. That's it. Um, so it can lead to the development of acute kidney injury, which can manifest itself as nephritis. Interesting. Layla did hold a small funeral for James at the house, and he's buried in Rose Township, not at in Fenton, where Ella is. She remains at the house. She's deeded ownership of the farm because they just got married, so she has everything coming to her now. She sends Annie back to New York. She lives alone in the house for the next year, and then she sells it. Oh, that picture is for anybody watching, that's Annie there in the middle, and that's the Osgoods, the couple that she lived with while she was freaking out about the Blanchard situation.
Okay, I thought that was another
No, I
person.
wish it was. I know. I wish it was. Um, so James is dead. Now it's just Layla. Um, Interestingly, Anna, that woman who was just in the picture there, she dies a month after James. Um, she died from a pustule on her nerve, as well as, and this is on her death certificate, absorption of poison.
So a lot of people are dropping dead of arsenic.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Her death was never investigated. They didn't do anything to connect it to anything, but it does seem really odd to me. Um, George, her husband, lived another 14 years. But Anna, the woman, she ended up dying pretty early. Uh, about a year after James dies, Layla gets married again. It's 1910. She marries John Parent in Saginaw, and he becomes this well-known minister in Saginaw. She sells the home a couple years later. They marry, or they have 3 kids. And she lived to be, uh, let's see, 58. She lived to be 58. She ended up dying of cancer. But she essentially drops off the map after that. There's no news of her anywhere. Nothing crazy happens. She just goes on and lives her life as a minister's wife. Um, and when she passed, she took the truth of what happened to Ella with her. And we will never, ever, ever know. But what a story, right?
Yeah, that really is a crazy story, and, uh, there's I'm putting a few of these clips that you sent me. One is officers would zoom woman's body to solve Fenton's mystery, and then you've got another newspaper clipping here. I think it's such an interesting story because there's so much of it that we've gotta speculate,
Mhm.
and, I'd encourage people to go ahead and get the book to read it in full. It's The Mysterious Mrs. White by Allie Seibert. And so I think that it's interesting too, just the amount of people that die of arsenic. I realize it's one of those things that was very common, and even today, it's still, common to use as a poison. In fact, there's a documentary on Netflix about the whole Tylenol scare where someone was putting arsenic in Tylenol to kill people.
Oh,
And the reason
God.
for it was the same reason from the 1900s, because you could buy it for rat poisoning over the counter,
Yeah. Oh,
and it's
wow.
very effective in killing people.
Oof. And that's kind of the thing though, is like with this case, we don't know. And if you look at it through the lens of assuming that everything is benign, you can make it look like it's all just kind of weird happenstance. Like, yeah, like James dies of nephritis. Well, yeah, no kidding. That's a normal thing that people died from at that point in time. He was using arsenic probably to kill the mice in the house. That makes sense. Ella, maybe she got sick and they were caring for her. Sure, whatever. They didn't want her family in New York to get the money. Like, you can spin all of this to make it feel like it's not weird. But to me, when you put all of it together, it just seems like there's gotta be something here.
Yeah, you know what I think is a theory for this too, is that I think that James, of course, he poisoned Ella,
Mhm.
and, they, of course, covered it up, changed her name. That way they could keep on stealing from her and, her late father.
Yeah.
And I wonder if college girl, what's her name again? Help me out here.
Layla.
Layla. So Layla, she's seeing this going on, and
Yep.
she's seeing how to poison people, and essentially she learns how to
Mhm.
murder someone. And
Yep.
James is old, his looks are gone, he's in his 60s, and she's like, "You know what? I'm tired of this old man. I need a
Yeah.
new man that can actually produce." A minister, that was like a very prominent position in any town, even
Yeah,
today.
absolutely.
So it's like, okay, what's way to one way to do it? Well, James has essentially already taught her how to do it.
Yep.
And so she goes and poisons him. And in a
Yeah.
way, it's almost like a really twisted redemption story of like Ella
Uh-huh.
gets her payback later on
Yeah.
by killing James essentially, by being a martyr in this.
Yeah. Well, that's what I always like to think of it as like a Goodbye Earl situation, you know, that Dixie Chick song? Or
Yes,
they're just the
I would have
chicks now.
played it if I would have thought of
Exactly.
that beforehand.
Yeah, but I like to think of it as a version of that where Layla saw all of this going on, was too young to do anything at the time, but then, realized, "Okay, I can get him to marry me, inherit all of this, kill him. That's for
Right.
you, Ella," sort
Be
of
done with
thing.
them. Right.
Exactly. My theory about her disappearing for months on end, um, there were also rumors that there were children in the house at times, like, people would hear children. My
Uh-huh.
theory is that she was pregnant and James didn't want her to be pregnant, so he'd just hide her for 9 months and then kill the baby, and then she was allowed back outside, which is a really horrible, horrible thing, but
It
that's my
is,
theory.
but that makes sense, and, very good of you for being so, dark and twisted. That's why I like having you on the show. You can think of, like, "Okay, what's more messed up than this? I know. We'll add a dead baby.
How can I
Multiple
make this
dead
worse
babies
than it
makes it
is?
better."
Exactly. You know
Is
what's
there
funny?
any dead babies in The Mysterious Miss White
There is
available on
well, I did talk
Amazon?
about it, but, nothing crazy. It's funny when I first came across this story, my friend brought it to me and everything, and I was really getting into it. I didn't know what house it was. I live really close to town, so I'm always, like, driving around and stuff, and I, uh, I finally found a picture of it at the Historical Society, and it was the house that I had thought that maybe it would be. And so I would like, because I was so in the weeds with this story, like, I was just in so deep. But I would go to this house, and it's on this dead end street. I'd drive up in my little car, and then I'd just sit there, turn the car off, and just look at it and, like, picture Ella, like, jumping out the window and, like, the officers in the yard. And eventually,
Oh,
I
yeah.
got brave enough, and I was like, "I'm gonna go knock on the door, and the worst they can do is meet me at the door with a shotgun like James." And I knocked on the door, and it's this sweet, sweet old couple. It's the Curtains. I love them. They I was like, "Hey, like, I'm a historian. I have this really crazy story about your house. Do you wanna hear it?" And they were like, "Sure." And they brought me in. They're like, "Do you want anything? What can we get you? Like, sit down, come on in." And then they were like, "Oh, tell us your story, tell us your story." And I told them this story. And by the end, their faces were like, "Oh my gosh."
We're selling the house.
Did
That's
you
it.
do?
Pack your crap.
I know, it's just so funny.
You need to offer, like,
They,
a tour during Halloween.
I
You don't even have to
know.
dress up the house. You can just bring the little kids there with their buckets and tell them about all the people that got poisoned there, and your
It's
theory
true,
about
though.
the dead baby thing.
Yeah.
That's,
It's crazy though, because it's the house is set up exactly like it would have been then, and if you go up into the bedrooms, the one where
that is
Ella
so freaky.
essentially lived. Yeah, I know. But if you go up there and then there's the one where George died, and then the one where Ella was living, the window, you can see exactly how she would have done it because the window opens up onto like a slanted roof thing over the porch.
Yeah.
And she would have hopped on that and then hopped down. But it makes so much sense when you're able to see it.
Yeah, that's just I can't believe that those old people still live in that house after hearing all that, and I'm sure that now every little creak in that house are like, is that Ella? Is that James?"
Well, I told them before I started telling them. I said, "Do you guys, like, get creeped out easy? Like, do you guys have any?" They're like, "Oh." I was like, "Okay." And they're
Not till
not.
he
They're
told him
very,
that.
like
Yeah.
they're right. They're, like, so, like, matter of fact, salt of the earth people, but they're joking because 'cause they're that kinda couple. They're just so cute. But they, they joke about serving each other too many grapes when they're annoyed with each other, which I think is really funny.
That is awesome. So, we can catch shows like this on Alley in the Archives. Do you want to tell us what your next episode is gonna be on Alley in the Archives? And
Yeah.
when those episodes drop?
So episodes come out every Thursday. We're recording this right now, so by the time this comes out, my next episode will be out. It's about Etta Fairchild. She is an old woman in Kalamazoo. I focus heavily on Michigan because that's where I live. I'd like to eventually branch out, but she's an old woman in Kalamazoo in 1929 who is accused of being a witch, and it's a modern day witch trial in 1929, which seems absolutely insane because we picture that stuff happening hundreds of years before, but it's more modern than you think.
I can't wait, and I think that's what's really cool about your show is that this is not something that you're doing research in front of your computer. You're actually driving to these places, talking with these old people, looking at these historic documents, and I find it really incredible and interesting.
Thanks.
Where can we find you on social media if they
Yeah,
wanna get
come
in touch with you?
you can come follow me on Instagram at Allie in the Archives. I would love to hear from you. Reach out, and if you have a case that you think I should talk about on my show, let me know. Or if you just want to say hi and give me a compliment, I also accept that.
Alright, well, you did a great job. If
Thanks,
you
Cam.
like the show, please like it and subscribe. Also, if you can give us a review, that would be great. If you would like to support me, I've got a book out myself, A Murder on Campus, A Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. I did that with my brother. We were investigating the 1973 murder of Virginia Olson on the campus of UNC Asheville. That book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can get the Audible version, a Kindle version, and anywhere else you can buy a book. If you'd like to follow me, you can hit me up on IG at Santana True Crime. And thank you very much. And we will see you next time.
Bye.